What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Payne. Welcome back to another Final Fantasy video. That's right, not Evercrisis, Final Fantasy video. So I was doing my usual thinking and I wanted to actually talk a little bit about the worst to the best protagonists in Final Fantasy history. Now, this is going to span all the way from Final Fantasy 1 all the way up to Final Fantasy 16, and I want to give you guys my take on some of the best and worst, ranking them, let's just say from the worst to the best protagonists in the game. Now, there's a lot of different personalities in Final Fantasy, and I want to go through each one and give you guys my take. And I'm curious to know if you guys agree, and I'm more than curious to know what your comments are about my takes, and I want to hear your takes as well, because I know for a fact there's going to be a lot of disagreement on this, because we all love the various heroes in these games, but I'm going to focus on the main one. So, without further ado, guys, let's start off with the worst, and we'll talk about that, and then we're going to work our way down through that whole list. See you guys shortly. Alright guys, starting at number 16, probably the prettiest looking boy and character out of all of them, and that is none other than the OG himself, the Warrior of Light. Now, what makes the Warrior of Light, unfortunately, very unforgettable in every iteration he's ever had, is the fact that he's a very generic character. They never really gave him much to work with, outside of the fact that his ultimate goal is to restore the world back to peace and defeat chaos. In the original game, he never really had a story. There were 4 Warriors of Light that joined. This is the character that they fleshed out as the main Warrior of Light, who was in fact the warrior and the tank of the group. But unfortunately, he never got love outside of any other game. Even in the city and stuff, they gave him a little bit of a backstory, but he was always the stoic main character and always the one that stood for righteousness and good. He represented all good in the world. But unfortunately, when it comes down to actual storyline and origin, he is the least interesting of the characters. So, at number 16, the Warrior of Light. Alright guys, moving on to number 15. Now, this unfortunate hero actually does require an introduction. This is the main protagonist for Final Fantasy 3. That's right, if you played the original Final Fantasy 3, you know the Warrior of Light concept was actually inlaid in that game as well. Believe it or not, after Final Fantasy 2, where Firion was in fact an actual hero with a name, they went back to the old ways of Final Fantasy 1 in Final Fantasy 3. It wasn't only until the re-release of this in the 3D version that Luneth became an actual hero. So an orphan raised by Nina and Elder Topapa in the village of Ur, village adventures by nature, his curiosity gets the better of him as he stumbles into a hole created by the Great Earthquake. Now, what makes Luneth unfortunately very unmemorable is the fact that the story is in fact just made up for this specific scenario. The character itself is not lovable. There's nothing memorable about the character, and unfortunately the only thing people really do remember about the character is the fact that it was where the Onion Knight originated. So there was a little bit of development for the orphans with Luneth, but unfortunately a very forgettable character from Final Fantasy 3. Moving on to number 14. Alright guys, so at number 14 we have none other than Firion. That's right, Final Fantasy 2, we went from 3 to 2. Now, what makes Firion actually a special hero is the fact that he was the first storyline character in the Final Fantasy lore ever created that was not a Warrior of Light. What makes him unique is the fact that they did focus on the fact that he's a leader. He's a very young and gallant warrior who joins the rebel cause to take down the Emperor and restore peace to the kingdom. The problem with him is the era that the story was created. They really weren't focusing on the narrative that they should have, which was his backstory, the loss of his parents, the fact that he had adopted ones, a lot his relationship with a lot of the characters in the game. They just really focus on just progressing the game and the story about the Emperor and the evils that was brought. So unfortunately, I think Firion kind of fell into the wrong era, even though he's a unique character and a good one. What makes him, again, very special is the fact that he was the first real fleshed out character they ever focused on as a hero. But unfortunately, because of the timeline and the era, they just didn't do enough to give him a fair shot. So at number 14, Firion from Final Fantasy 2. Alright guys, moving on to 13. Alright guys, coming in at number 13 is none other than Bartz Klauser. Now, if you don't know who Bartz is, he is the protagonist from Final Fantasy V, which I think had some of the best job systems in the game. Bartz is actually unique, and I remember this because he loves his Chocobo. He and Chocobo are the companions of the game that come out first in the intro. What makes Bartz a little bit more unique than the rest of the characters is the fact that he's so damn lighthearted. Everything is so positive to him, and it was a breath of fresh air to see that, because everything prior to that was so damn gloomy. So Bartz kind of has a big role in the Final Fantasy genre by first creating the most lighthearted character of its time, in my opinion, in the Final Fantasy old franchises, but unfortunately, he just doesn't get enough love in the game's story to kind of advance his character any more than that to me. He is a warrior of light. He does take the mantle and the leadership very seriously, but unfortunately, they just don't do a good enough job of fleshing out the character's origins and giving him a bigger role than he should actually have. But overall, still the first actual positive, over positive Final Fantasy hero that we have in Final Fantasy V. All right, guys, moving to number 12. Coming in at number 12, guys, is none other than Vaughn from Final Fantasy XII. Now, what kind of kills this character? And I love his look. I love his feel. He is in the world of Ivalice, which is one of my favorite Final Fantasy lore worlds. And he is surrounded by a cast of incredible, incredible heroes, which unfortunately take the limelight and shine off of him. Everyone else in the story has something more important going on than Vaughn, which kind of puts him in his own game, and it doesn't make him feel like the protagonist. The other people come out with more important lore, with more important stories, with more important objectives and missions, and kind of puts Vaughn kind of as a secondary character in his own storyline. He does get a lot more story than more of the other characters that we just talked about earlier because he is in a newer game, and storylines in Final Fantasy became a lot more important back then. But out of the newer games, I'd say Vaughn is probably the least protagonist hero that represents his own game. So we're going on from number 12 to number 11, guys. Coming in at number 11 is Tidus. That's right. Speaking of people who are taking a backseat in their own game, Tidus plays that unfortunate role and is surrounded by a cast of superbly written characters and badass looking ones at that. Whether you look at Auron, look at Jet, you look at Yuna, and others in the game, Tidus doesn't live up to the protagonist. Now, he is a pretty unique character. He's a little bit lovable, except when he's doing this, which is probably the worst part of the game. And I think that took away a lot of the rep that a lot of people had and love for him. But Tidus does play a pretty significant role in his own game. Unfortunately, he does take a backseat to Yuna, who really the storyline is all about, right? And you can see this because the rest of the games that come after that are, in fact, about Yuna and her girl power posse, right? So Tidus unfortunately falls flat in that regard, but Final Fantasy X does a great job making you love his relationship with his cast, and you actually do kind of fall in love with Tidus as a character because he is lovable, he is charismatic, even though he's a little annoying and he's a little whiny, which kind of takes points off of him for me. But unfortunately, like I said, being around some of the more marquee characters in Final Fantasy X makes Tidus lose a lot of points in my opinion, at least as being the main protagonist of his own game, and takes a backseat to Yuna. So, moving on to number 10. Coming in at number 10, guys, is Cloud Strife. Now, hear me out. Before everybody starts hating on me, hear me out. Cloud is a lot of things. Cloud is mopey, Cloud is grumpy, Cloud is egotistical, Cloud is confused, and Cloud is a hero. Cloud is a lot of things. There's a lot of things that represent this character, but what I didn't love about Cloud is the fact that he was the biggest Debbie Downer out of anybody. Even if you look at Advent Children, Debbie Downer. Dude is just depressed on a constant basis. In my opinion, even in the wheelchair scene where you kind of like, feel bad for him because he's a vegetable, I kind of wish he just kind of died and Zack took his place. I really did. I was just like, yo, get rid of Cloud. He's just bringing down the mood. So out of all the heroes, as much as I love Final Fantasy VII, and it is one of my favorite Final Fantasy games of all time, I think as a protagonist, Cloud brings a lot of mopiness, grumpiness. Although he does bring a lot of stoicism and heroism, it's overshadowed by the fact that he's just a miserable bastard. So coming at number 10 for me is Cloud. Let me hear the hate, guys, but this is just my opinion on it. Number 9. Squall Leonhardt. Now, I know for a fact when Square Enix created Squall, they looked at the popularity of Cloud and were like, we need to make somebody who's just as grumpy and an asshole as everybody else, as he was, and it was popular. It was the main thing to go with. Now, the difference between Squall and Cloud is that Squall, we knew right from the get-go what he was, right? Cloud was confused. He's had a lot of things going on in his past and it wasn't explained very well until the very end. And even then, in the original Final Fantasy, it wasn't explained. But Squall, we knew right away, was selfish. He was an asshole. He was looking out for himself. And he was extremely, extremely focused on his own needs to advance in the academy. And then eventually that shifted, where he became the leader, the commander. His natural abilities came out. And you started to notice a shift in his attitude where he really started to care about his party and his crew, giving Squall the little edge over Cloud. Now, not to mention The Gunblade was the first introduction of a very unique weapon in the Final Fantasy world. It was one of the most badass looking weapons, and I have to admit, I kind of like the way Squall looks compared to Cloud, so I kind of give him points there. But they are pretty much the same character in a different universe, in a different dimension, with some underlying qualities that make them different, of course. But I think Squall just has a little edge against Cloud, in my opinion, just because what you see is what you get. There is no confusion. There is no mystery. He just is what he is, and I kind of love that about him. So Squall rounds up to number 9. Moving over to number 8. Coming in at number 9 is Noctis. That's right. I gave him the edge over Cloud and Squall. Now, the reason behind this, hear me out, okay? When I play Final Fantasy 15, I felt like I was part of the crew. He was a complete dick to his friends, but I mean he's a prince becoming a king, right? So it always felt natural, and I kind of believed it. I believed in his personality. I believed in the fact that he was going for the greater good, and I think his characters really balanced him out. And I know that's not really what we're looking at here, but for some reason, I really kind of felt relatable with Noctis' personality and how he handled things. Not to mention, he's freaking strong, man. If we're talking about like characters who are probably the strongest Final Fantasy protagonist in history, I would say he would probably be top 2, maybe first place easily. I think he would wipe the floor with every other hero in the list. So with that alone, I think he deserves to get that. Not to mention, of course, his relationship with Lunafreya, which is unique, and the whole fact that he's a prince becoming a king. And I think it was kind of unique to have that whole sense of monarchy in the game rather than a rebel or somebody who doesn't know who they are or an ex-soldier, right? So I think it kind of gave him a pretty unique storyline and also some good characters to follow him around. And at the end of the day, like I really mean it. I felt relatable to him, and I felt like I was joining the boys in a car ride through the Final Fantasy 15 world. So there you guys have it for me. Final Fantasy 15. We're looking at number 9, and that is Noctis. Moving over to number 8. All right, guys. So sitting at number 8 is Terra Branford. Now, if you've never played Final Fantasy 6, I highly recommend you jump on that, even if you are a young kid and you are, in love with the Final Fantasy series. Final Fantasy 6 is, to a lot of people, the greatest of all time, and that's a lot thanks to Terra. But unfortunately, because it's the largest Final Fantasy cast, I think, of all time, there are so many good personalities in this game that Terra kind of gets overshadowed. Now, not to take anything away from her, the story is still revolving around her, the Espers, her struggle and plight to save the world from Kefka. She does bring everybody together, and she's just the most lovable and good-hearted character with a very, very dark past. Now, unfortunately, that's the part where she kind of falls short. She is a little bit one-sided when it comes down to that. Her nature is good-willed. She, again, is natural with magic. We're in a world where magic is no longer a natural thing. And her resolve to save the world is absolutely one of the best things about her. But again, because of Locke, Cyan, Gao, you name it, all the other characters out there with their own storyline, and Cecile, and like Edgar, Sabin, like they all have their own storylines, and some of their storylines completely overshadow hers and are a lot more interesting. So in that regard, she does kind of fall flat on that, just because she's probably in the cast of some of the best Final Fantasy heroes of all time. So coming in at number 8, Terra. Moving on to number 7, guys. Speaking of controversial, and I'm not doing this on purpose, I promise you guys, coming in at number 7, we have Chocobo. That's right, I don't care what you guys say. Chocobos have been in the game, in every Final Fantasy game, as a matter of fact, since the beginning, and to me are some of the most lovable characters in the game. Now, the reason why this is a hero is there is a Chocobo dungeon game and a Chocobo racing game, and I think they deserve to get some love on the list. So, whether it's from carrying your ass around the map, exploring dungeons, being cute as hell, you raising multiple different colors, having them fly, do mountains, them helping you as a companion in battles, depending on the game you're playing, Chocobos play a historic part in Final Fantasy stories and should not be overlooked. So, coming in at number 7, guys, is none other than Chocobos. I don't care what you guys say, I love them, and I think they are the heroes in most of the games, because again, without them, this game would be boring. No, I'm just kidding. Chocobo's coming in at number 7. All right, guys, moving in to number 6. All right, guys, coming in at number 6 is none other than Lightning. That's right. What starts off to be a very standard, normal, streamlined, grumpy character ends up becoming a very compelling character that advances, and her love for saving her sister and her mission in order to do that is one for the ages. Lightning is one of the characters that grows on you as the game progresses. You get to see her lightheartedness, you get to see her stoicism become heroism, you get to see her actual personality evolve, and as the mission to save her sister progresses, you kind of see how good of a person she really is and how powerful she is. So I think if you take Cloud and like Noctis, put them together and kind of create somebody, you get yourself Lightning. I honestly think she's so damn powerful, so she's so damn cool. And I have to admit, even though I didn't like the Final Fantasy 13 games, I was absolutely in love with Lightning as a character. And I think she's one of the best heroes out there. I think she represents it all and does it all. The only thing she's missing a little bit, what the other ones have, is a better, in my opinion, origin and also a little bit better humor, which I think is needed in a lot of these dark Final Fantasy games. So coming in is Lightning. We're going to be moving on to the next one. Going on to the top 5 guys. I'll see you there. Coming in at number 5 is Jack Garland. And you might be wondering, who the hell is that? Well, Strangers of Paradise Final Fantasy Origins is actually one of my favorite iterations of the original Final Fantasy game. And Jack Garland is the breath of fresh air that was required. Him and his cast are, in fact, the reason why the whole thing happens. Now, if you don't know anything about Jack, Jack is in fact trying to defeat chaos and trying to understand what the hell is going on. And he actually ends up becoming none other than the infamous Garland, who also wears the mantle of chaos himself. He is actually the reason why the Warriors of Light who they are. Now, if you've never played the game, I don't want to spoil it, but he and his friends play a pivotal role in the world of Final Fantasy and what it all represents. Now, Jack himself is a very cool character. He shows a lot of emotions. He's a protagonist that has anger, he has confusion, he's got courage, and he's all about doing the right thing. But at the end of the day, he loses himself and becomes one of the most tragic stories, but also one of the coolest spins on Final Fantasy 1. And I absolutely, guys, recommend you guys try this game out, and at the very least, check out the storyline and how Final Fantasy 1 all begins and the origins of Chaos and the Warriors of Light. So Jack coming in at number 5. All right, guys, coming in at number 4 is Zidane. That's right, Final Fantasy IX's light-hearted character. And I tell you now, the biggest breath of fresh air when you went from Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 8 protagonist to Final Fantasy 9, it was like night and day. What really made him so unique to me, number one, was his look. He was the most unique looking protagonist I've ever seen because he wasn't just a regular human, right? He was lighthearted in nature, and he provided a lot of unique experiences in the game with his personality. But when it came down to taking care of business, he was amazing as a thief and a leader overall. Not to mention, his actual interactions with a lot of the characters were actually really fun because he had a personality that was brought out through the storyline and through the interactions with a lot of the NPCs in the game. He's smart, he was loyal, he has incredible wit, and overall, just a badass character. As a thief especially, and it's rare to see thieves being the main characters of the Final Fantasy games, Zidane was none other than the best thief probably ever in Final Fantasy history, outside of probably Locke from Final Fantasy VI, not to take that away from him, but he was not the main character. So we're talking about the main protagonist. Zidane falls under number 4. Moving on to the top 3, guys. Oh man, here we go. Coming in at number 3, Clive Rosfeld. That's right, the newest addition, the newest protagonist to the Final Fantasy series, coming in at Final Fantasy 16. Now, Clive has an advantage here. He was written by some of the best minds in the Final Fantasy business. Yoshi P was part of the project, instantly giving this, you know, the story's gonna be incredible, especially with Final Fantasy 14 is. Clive is probably the most well-rounded hero in history. He has it all. He does it all. He expresses it all. And on top of that, he's just an overall badass. Now, without spoiling anything, because I don't want to do that, if you have not played the game, Clive goes through a traumatic event which changes his life and course of history, and he becomes a powerful entity that changes the way the landscape and everything is viewed from a Final Fantasy perspective. But I think overall as a character, he is everything you want in a protagonist. He would have been easily number 1 if it wasn't for the next 2. Clive, in my opinion, voice acting, look, the character, everything. Clive brings it all, and it, to me, is probably one of the most memorable protagonists up to date. And that is a lot to say, especially with the next 2 coming up. All right, guys, going on to number 2. Coming in at number 2, guys, and this one was hard, okay? Because you have to understand, Final Fantasy IV is my favorite Final Fantasy of all time, but Cecil Harvey comes in at number 2 and is only beaten out by this next person because of how far in advance this person had a story. But Final Fantasy IV was I think the epitome of storytelling, and the character shunned like none other. Cecil played a role of a dark knight who was tired of killing, taking orders from a kingdom to do bad, and wanted to make up for all the atrocities that he caused, and became a paladin who eventually saves the world with probably the most epic adventure, and I will say, one of the best stories ever told in Final Fantasy history. And never did once did any other character take that limelight away from the main hero. And that's rare in a Final Fantasy game, because the cast itself was so well put together. We're talking about Kain, Rosa, Rydia, you name it. The cast was absolutely bonkers in this game. But nobody ever took away the limelight from Cecil. And that it is credit to the storytellers, the writers, to make the hero in the spotlight at all times. So Cecil, to me, would have been number one if it wasn't for the next character. So moving on to my opinion, the best Final Fantasy protagonist of all time. All right, guys, if you've been watching this whole time, you're at 21 minutes, and I applaud you for getting here. And number one to me is none other than Zack Fair. Now, Zack is everything you want in a hero. Everything. He admires his peers. He looks up to the heroes that came before him. He respects them. He's loyal. He's courageous. He's a skilled fighter. He's a good leader. And he has a big heart. Zack, I think, is everything that Cloud should have been. And more. I think, if anything, I always say this to myself, I wish he replaced Cloud on a constant basis, because he is, in fact, the best hero this game deserved. I believe Final Fantasy VII would have been an even better game if Zack was the main hero. I just recently played Crisis Core Reunion again. I played the original, went back to it. And the relationship with Angeal, Sephiroth, Genesis even, as a villain, Zack had compassion. He cared about his peers, even lowly soldiers who didn't even love him. And he was just so determined to be better. He reminded me of Naruto trying to be the Hokage. He just wanted to be better. And you know what? He made people around him better. He wasn't a Debbie Downer. He wasn't somebody that people looked down to and were like, this guy's kind of like questionable. Everyone looked at Zack as a beacon of light in the story. And I really do wish he was the main hero of Final Fantasy VII. So there's my number one, guys. Zack Fair, the best Final Fantasy protagonist in Payne's eyes. This is Payne. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. I'm really curious to know your thoughts. I want to know your numbers. I want to know where you guys rank these characters in your eyes. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.